Hello my dear clients. On this video I would like to discuss DAP Incoterms contracts. What is DAP Incoterms? Because we are speaking about the trading contracts between Russian companies and foreign companies, and it's not only about between these two countries, but about any foreign companies. So what is DAP Incoterms? DAP, it means delivered at place, delivery to the place of destination. This is the meaning. This is the term of international rules Incoterms 2010, Incoterms International Commerce Terms, denoting one of the varieties of the universal terms of the contract of the international sales in goods. Incoterms are generally used when goods are sold across national borders. Incoterms were first published in 1936 and had 7 updates since today. The current version dates September 16, 2010 and is approved by the international organizations. The rules applied by the parties of international trade contracts around the world, including in Russia, so that the parties to international contracts have a uniform understanding of terminology on the key terms of the contract. It must be understood that the Incoterms are applied to determine only if there is a direct reference to their application in the main supply contract. In the absence of a reference to the application of Incoterms, the international rules will not be applied automatically. Their application will depend on their whatever their binding in the country of dispute. For example, in countries such as Poland, Japan, Iraq, Spain, Incoterms are mandatory, but in France, Germany, Kazakhstan, Incoterms are considered an international custom. The parties to an international contract may be unfamiliar with the trade practices conducted in their counterparty's country. Because of these, problems may arise between counterparties throughout their execution of the agreement. Using DAP Incoterms 2010 provides certainty for interpretation of key terms. DAP Incoterms' terms of delivery regulate the following rights of the parties. First of them, the place of delivery of goods. Second, it's a cargo insurance and transportation costs. Third, fulfillment of customs formalities. 4, it's a allocation of costs. And number 5, it's risks of accidental loss. The DAP Incoterms terms don't replace the primary contract. DAP Incoterms are not a substitute for the main supply contract itself, but themselves the DAP Incoterms govern only limited obligations of the parties and apply only to the contract participants. These conditions distribute responsibilities for compliance with customs formalities when importing and exporting goods, duties for transporting goods, insurance providing confirmation of the proper execution of the terms of the contract. At the same time, Incoterms doesn't regulate the consequences of non-fulfillment of the contract by one of the parties or the liability of parties under. It also doesn't resolve the questions of ownership of the goods. Also, all provisions not reflected in Incoterms must specify in detail in the main agreement or be guided by national legal regulations. Anything that is not permitted by Incoterms is permitted using the main contract and applicable law. How ownership transfers by Incoterms 2010. Incoterms don't determine the easy ownership transfer of the goods. It may seem that the provisions of Incoterms indicating the place of delivery of the goods also determine the transfer of ownership, but in reality this is not the case. In reality, there are no international rules containing a clause regarding the ownership of goods. Thus, if the parties operate in countries with different applicable laws, it would be better to indicate in the contract the necessary clauses so that the counterparties have one understanding of these specific conditions. For example, upon delivery of the goods, it is possible to envisage the right of seller to retain the goods until the final payment of the cost of the goods. The presence of such a condition in the contract will help reduce the economic risks of non-payment of goods. But not in all countries the indication of such a condition is permissible. Therefore, when drawing up a contract, it is recommended to consult with a Russian lawyer in this area. And also our company can give such services for you. For example, we will consider the terms of delivery of goods DAP delivered at place in Incoterms using the example of railway transportation. This is the real our case. According to clause 4, the delivery is carried out by the supplier in transport prepared for unloading to a place agreed with the buyer. Imagine that the goods are delivered to a border crossing, for example, at the we have such city, Manchuria Zabaikalsk railway station. Rail carries now that Russia and Chinese railway have different track gauges. The Chinese railway gauge is 1,432 millimeters, and the Russian railway gauge is 1,520 millimeters. Thus, it is obvious that the tracks are incompatible and the cargo coming from Russia must be reloaded into Chinese wagons. Railcar reloading services are paid to the other of the railway infrastructure, as a rule, at a cost 25–30,000 rubles for each car. It's about $400–500 for each car. It becomes necessary to decide who will pay for these costs, the buyer or the seller. Clause A6 of Incoterms indicates that the seller must pay the costs incurred in connection with the transportation of the goods until the moment of their transfer to an agreed point. Clause B6 of Incoterms in turn indicates that the buyer's obligations is to pay the costs incurred in connection with the unloading and acceptance of goods. Therefore, in order of the parties to have certainty regarding the costs of DAP in Incoterms, it is necessary to set out in as much details its conditions and the procedure of distributing costs at different stages of delivery and transportation. Let's consider similar situations using the example of sea transportation free on board, FOB. When selling bulk goods, grain, coal and so on, through sea transportation, it is also necessary, in addition to the inclusion of conditions on the application of FOB in the international contract, also to include conditions of the distribution of costs when loading sea vessels. The reason of this is the following. A cargo cone is formed during conveyor loading into a ship's hold. Depending on how many holds have been loaded, so many cones will appear. These cones impede the safe movement of seagoing vessels, so no capital on a seagoing vessels will sail with an unevenly spaced cargo. The capital will require you to trim the cargo, uniform distribution of cargo in the hold. Such work can be performed either by the ship's crew or by the port workers, but in any case, this work must be paid additionally. On this basis, disputes often arise between the seller and the buyer of the goods. The seller declares that trimming is an independent work that is not related to the carriage of goods and shouldn't be paid at the expense of seller. International FOB rules impose these obligations on the seller and equate it with the obligations to load the vessels. However, in the port of Japan, Iran, the Russian port of Novorossiysk, such an operation is not included in the usual set of port operations and is indicated on the invoice as an additional service. In order for you not to have any difficulties in the execution of international contracts that includes the provisions of Incoterms 2010, you must specify in detail in the contract all conditions that are significant for you. Our team of arbitration lawyers have experience in conducting arbitration cases on the application of Incoterms 2010 terms in international contracts. If you have such problems, if you have such tasks, you can contact with us. And at the end of this speech, I wish you the best. I wish you success in your business, in your deeds. So if you need help, you can contact us. Please call us. We'll help you, and you will be sure that all your documents, all your contracts will be in law. So, bye. See you in our office.